The galaxy laughed when humans sent one ship, then it arrived. The laughter hit every translation array. At the same moment, I was sitting at Console 7 in the diplomatic monitoring wing of the Galactic Conclave Observation Station. When it happened, 43 species represented in that chamber, and every single one of them made the sound their biology permitted for amusement. The Keth made a wet clicking noise deep in their throat pouches. The Voreth shook their upper limbs and showed their secondary teeth. The Drevani collapsed their sensory cilia in that full-body shudder that their own linguists had long ago confirmed meant hilarity. They were laughing at us. My name is Oliver Grant. I had been a junior diplomatic analyst for the Conclave Human Liaison Office for 2 years at that point, and in those 2 years I had never once seen the chamber respond to anything with unified emotion. These were species that had been at cold war with each other for longer than humanity had been writing things down, and Earth had somehow made all of them laugh at the same time. The message from Earth had arrived 40 minutes earlier. I had read the summary before the formal presentation, and my stomach had dropped so fast I thought I might need to excuse myself from my station. The Conclave ultimatum had been clear, straightforward, insulting in its clarity. Humanity had 30 standard cycles to present a war fleet of no fewer than 40 vessels as a tribute of entry, proving sufficient military development to warrant protected species status and a seat at the table of galactic governance. Failure to comply would result in classification as a pre-sovereign species, which meant no rights, no protections, no recourse if a larger power decided your solar system had something worth taking. Earth had been given this ultimatum 4 months ago. Earth's response had arrived today. 1 ship, 1 single vessel, designation UNS Perseverance, a deep survey class ship that had been commissioned 3 years earlier for long-range scientific exploration. It was not a warship. It carried no significant weapons load by any standard the Conclave recognized. It had a crew of 43. Its hull was rated for deep space endurance, not combat engagement, and Earth had sent it alone with a polite diplomatic note that read, and I'm quoting directly from the translation log: the Perseverance departs immediately. It will arrive at Conclave space within 6 standard months. We look forward to continued dialogue. That was it. No apology, no explanation, no request for an extension, no acknowledgement that they had sent 1 survey ship instead of 40 warships. Just, we look forward to continued dialogue. The chamber exploded. Ambassador Velk of the Keth stood from his seat and spoke for 11 uninterrupted minutes about the historical pattern of species that had responded to the entry ultimatum with gestures of defiance and what had happened to all of them. His tone was not angry, it was almost sad. It was the tone of someone watching a creature walk toward a cliff in full daylight. The Drevani ambassador, a tall, narrow being named Coordinator Haas, did not speak at all. She simply pulled up the technical specifications of the Perseverance on the chamber display and let everyone look at them. The ship's dimensions, its crew count, its weapons manifest, its scientific equipment load. She held that display up for a full 2 minutes of silence that among the Drevani is the equivalent of a very loud groan. The Voreth delegation requested the Floor and their lead speaker, Admiral Designate Preth, said 12 words that the translation array rendered as, "This is either the bravest thing we have ever seen or the saddest." Nobody in that chamber was looking at me. Nobody was thinking about the human liaison office at all. We were furniture. We were the people who filed the translation logs and kept the coffee, or whatever the human equivalent of coffee was deemed appropriate for diplomatic settings, warm. We had no vote, no formal standing, no presence on the chamber floor. I kept my face very still and typed my observation notes with hands that were not entirely steady. My colleague Nina Walsh leaned over from console 8 and whispered that maybe Earth knew something we did not. I told her that I genuinely had no idea what Earth knew. What I did not say was that I had spent the previous night reading everything publicly available about the Perseverance. I had done it out of professional obligation, the kind of anxious, late-night research that analysts do when they sense a situation accelerating towards something they do not have a framework for. I had expected to find a mid-range exploration vessel with a competent but unremarkable record. Instead, I had found something that kept me reading until the station's artificial dawn cycle clicked on. The Perseverance had completed 7 deep range survey missions in 3 years. 7. The average deep range survey vessel completes 2 in that time frame. It had charted 11 previously unknown microlanes through dense nebula sectors, 6 of which had been adopted into official navigational databases by 3 separate galactic freight consortiums within a year of publication. Its chief science officer had published 42 papers in the past 36 months, a rate that several academic bodies had quietly flagged as statistically improbable. The ship had survived direct passage through the outer corona of a Class B pulsar, not a pass near it through it, and its post-mission damage report listed 7 hull microfractures, all of which the ship's own repair systems had sealed before it reached the nearest station. 7 microfractures. I had looked up what most vessels suffered in a pulsar corona pass. The ones that survived at all typically listed damage in the hundreds of systems. I closed my reading file at 400 station time, lay on the small cot in my office, stared at the ceiling and thought about 43 people who chose to do that on purpose. Now in the chamber, the vote to formally classify humanity as a pre-sovereign species was being called for by 3 delegations simultaneously. Velk of the Keth moved to delay it by 30 cycles, citing the principle that a response vessel in transit deserved the courtesy of arrival before judgment. It was the only mercy in the room, and it passed narrowly. The conclave would wait for the Perseverance to arrive, which meant 6 months of waiting, which meant 6 months of everyone watching. The chamber adjourned. The delegations filed out in clusters, already talking among themselves in the low, urgent tones. That meant political calculation. Nina was pulling together the summary brief for the human ambassador's office. Around me, the monitoring wing was moving back to routine. I pulled up the Perseverance's departure broadcast on my personal screen. It had been transmitted to Earth and flagged as non-sensitive, so it was in the public liaison archive. Commander Kate Reyes, 41 years old, previously commanding officer of 2 other deep survey vessels with an unblemished record, had addressed her crew for 4 minutes before departure. The translation algorithm had processed it cleanly. She had not mentioned the conclave once. She had talked about the route, about the 3 survey stops she had built into the transit schedule because, in her words, there was no reason a transit mission could not also be a productive one. She had mentioned that the galley had been stocked with enough fresh ingredients for proper cooking for the first 3 months, after which they would rotate to preserved stores, and that Lieutenant Paul Decker had volunteered to run a bread-making workshop on the 2nd week out. She had said that the mission duration was approximately 6 months and that she expected everyone to arrive rested, sharp and well-fed. Then she had said, "See you on the other side. Do good work." That was the entire pre-departure address from the commanding officer of the only vessel Earth had sent to face the judgment of the Galactic Conclave. I watched the Perseverance's transponder signal appear on the long-range navigation display. It was a small, clean dot moving at a steady and unhurried pace toward the outer edge of the human system, and then it folded into faster-than-light transit and was gone. The chamber had laughed, every species, every delegation, every ambassador with their translated amusement and their head shaking, and there this is either brave or sad commentary. And I sat at console 7 and watched that dot disappear and thought about a crew of 43 people who had packed fresh ingredients for 3 months, who had scheduled a bread-making workshop for the 2nd week of their journey to face a civilization-level ultimatum, and who had not, as far as I could tell from the public record, expressed anything that translated as fear. 6 months. I requested a report extension from my supervisor and started building a proper file on the Perseverance. I was going to need it. The first anomaly showed up on the navigational tracking log 18 days into the transit. I almost missed it. I was cross-referencing the Perseverance's filed flight plan against actual transponder data, routine work, the kind of thing that fills the slow hours of a monitoring shift, and there it was. The ship had deviated from its registered course by a margin of roughly 3 light hours and had come to a complete stop. The stop lasted 11 hours and 7 minutes. I pulled the coordinates. There was nothing at those coordinates, or rather, there was nothing listed at those coordinates in the current conclave navigational database, but I was thorough and I pulled the historical archive too, going back 300 standard years. A Giovanni relay station had operated at those coordinates for 60 years and had gone dark 2 centuries ago. It was listed in the archive as decommissioned, stripped, and abandoned. The conclave had sent a survey drone past it 40 years ago and confirmed there was nothing left but the frame. The Perseverance had stopped at a 200-year-old abandoned relay station skeleton and sat there for 11 hours. I flagged the deviation in the daily log and wrote a note that said, "Purpose unclear, possibly routine survey. Protocol." I did not actually think it was routine survey protocol. I had been reading enough about the ship by now to know that the Perseverance did not do things without reason, but I also did not have a better explanation, so I filed it and moved on. I was the only person in the monitoring wing who had noticed the Perseverance file was not a high-priority watch item. The conclave was treating the ship's Transit the way you treat a slow-moving administrative process. It was in motion. It would arrive when it arrived. And until it arrived, there was nothing to discuss. The Keith delegation had not asked for a tracking update in 2 weeks. The Vorcha had filed a formal inquiry about Earth's general military posture and received the standard liaison response, which I had drafted myself in, which contained no information that was not already in the public record. Nina had moved on to a border dispute, mediation between the Keith and a smaller species called the Arish, which was genuinely heating up and required her full attention. My supervisor, a patient and overworked man named Director Leonard Cole, had told me that my perseverance file was thorough and that he would read it when things quieted down. Things did not quiet down. They rarely did at the conclave. So I was alone with the tracking data, and I kept reading. On day 31, the Perseverance made a second unscheduled stop. This one lasted 3 hours and was at the edge of a small dust cloud that the navigational charts listed as a minor hazard, notable only for unusually high concentrations of a rare metallic compound. I looked up the compound. It had industrial applications in high-stress hull plating, the kind used in vessels rated for extreme environment transit. The ship's repair manifest, which was transmitted as a standard automated update every 10 days, showed no hull work being done. On day 44, something happened that was not an unscheduled stop at all. The Perseverance sent a standard navigational advisory to the Keth border station it was about to pass near. This was required by conclave protocol. What was not required was the attachment. The ship had attached complete navigational chart of a microlane through the Scar Nebula, a dense hazardous region that sat between Keth space and a cluster of rich but inaccessible star systems. The lane had not been in any database. It was new. The Perseverance had apparently mapped it on approach, labeled it with full safety ratings and recommended entry vectors, and sent it to the Keth station as a courtesy, not in exchange for anything, not as a negotiating gesture. Just here is something useful. We noticed it. You might want it. I stared at that attachment for a long time. The Keth border station commander, low-ranking official whose messages I had no real reason to be monitoring, except that I was now monitoring everything adjacent to the Perseverance, sent back a brief reply. The translation read, "Acknowledged. Source of navigational data queried." The Perseverance's response was 6 words: direct survey offered freely. Safe travels. I pulled out a fresh document and started writing what I was privately calling my concerns log. I titled it something bland for the official record, but in my own notes I wrote at the top, "I think we are all looking at this wronged." Everyone was watching the Perseverance the way you watch a small animal wandering into a place where it does not belong, with curiosity, maybe a little pity, waiting for the inevitable moment it realizes its mistake. The laughter in the chamber had faded into a background assumption. The ship would arrive, the conclave would have its formal rejection hearing, humanity would receive its pre-sovereign classification, and the situation would resolve itself. Nobody was asking what the ship was doing on the way there. I was asking, and the answers were making the back of my neck feel strange. On day 60, the Perseverance did the thing with the neutron star. It was not on any flight plan. It was not required for any navigational reason. There were two clean routes to conclave space that did not involve the Heron 7 system, where a Class X neutron star sat in a slow decaying orbit around a dead companion. It was not a shortcut. It added approximately 14 hours to the transit. The Perseverance folded out of faster-than-light travel crossed the outer boundary of the Heron 7 system and flew directly into the neutron star's inner emission zone. It was inside that zone for 6 hours. No vessel in the conclave database had a confirmed record of surviving 6 hours in a Class X inner emission zone. There were theoretical models suggesting it was possible with certain advanced shielding configurations, but theoretical was the key word. The Dravani had attempted a 1-hour pass 30 years ago with a purpose-built probe and lost it to hull failure at the 40-minute mark. The Perseverance came out the other side, running normal, its automated status report transmitted immediately on. Re-emergence listed all systems operational, no casualties, minor surface oxidation on the forward sensor array that the maintenance team had already begun addressing. Minor surface oxidation. I read that line 5 times. Then I did something I had not done in 2 months of working on this file. I walked down the corridor to Director Cole's office, knocked on the open door, and said, "Sir, I need you to look at something." He looked. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Pull the full technical specifications on their shielding array. Cross-reference it with the repair drone. Manifest from their last station. Resupply before departure." I had already done this. I showed him what I had found. The Perseverance had resupplied with a drone complement that was 3 times the standard load for a vessel its size. The drones were rated for battle damage. Repair scenarios, they were not standard. Survey equipment, they had been signed out of a facility that primarily serviced vessels used in Earth's deep Space Emergency Response Division. Director Cole looked at me. I looked at him. He said, "Write this up formally. Brief, flag it for the senior watch." I went back to my desk and started writing. On day 72, I received a notification from the monitoring algorithm that I had not set up myself. Someone else in the system had put a secondary watch flag on the Perseverance file. I traced the flag back through 2 routing protocols before it anonymized. It had originated from a VOR-F intelligence liaison terminal. The VOR-F were watching too. On day 91, the Perseverance sent another courtesy message. This one went to the Arash homeworld station, the Arash being the small species currently in a border dispute with the Keth. The message was in perfect Arash dialect, which the Perseverance crew had apparently learned from publicly available linguistic archives, and it contained greetings and offer of cultural exchange at some future point, and a small data packet that, when I decoded it with the standard translation protocols, turned out to be a historical map of Arash territorial boundaries going back 3 centuries. The Arash had been trying to get that historical map recognized by the Conclave for 60 years. The original survey records had been held in a Dravani archival station that had been decommissioned, and most of the data considered lost. The Perseverance had found it in the abandoned relay station. That was what the 11-hour stop had been about. I sat at my console and felt something shift in my understanding of what I was watching. This was not a ship that had stumbled into a bad situation and was making the best of it. This was not a vessel that had been sent as a symbolic gesture or a diplomatic bluff. This was a crew of 43 people who had spent the transit doing work, careful, methodical, generous, specific work, who had studied the region they were traveling through, identified things that mattered to the people who lived there, and handed those things over without keeping score. I thought about the bread making workshop, the fresh ingredients, the commander's calm voice saying, "Do good work." The laughter in that chamber felt very far away now. On day 112, a message came through the general liaison channel addressed to all monitoring stations. It was from the Perseverance. It was a menu, specifically a recipe for something called green chili stew from a crew member named Petty Officer Grace Liu, with a note that said the crew had voted it their favorite meal of the transit so far and thought it would be a shame to keep it to themselves. Nina read it over my shoulder and burst out laughing, but she was not laughing the way the conclave had laughed. She was laughing the way you laugh when something surprises you and you do not quite have the vocabulary to process it. Yet, 6 days later, the Perseverance transmitted its final approach advisory. It was arriving 3 weeks ahead of its own projected schedule. I had not slept properly in 11 days. I had a document on my screen that was now 63 pages long. It contained everything I had found, everything I had cross-referenced, every moment of this transit that had been filed under routine or anomalous, and which I believed were neither. I sent it to Director Cole with a subject line that said, "Please read this before they dock." Then I pulled up the long-range tracking display, found the clean, steady signal of the Perseverance entering conclave approach space, and watched it come. It dropped out of faster than light transit at exactly 0.3 astronomical units from the main conclave docking hub, on time to the minute. I had been at my console for 22 hours straight. The entire monitoring wing was staffed for the first time since I had started working there, every seat filled, Director Cole standing behind the central display with his arms folded and his expression doing something complicated. The conclave chamber was in full session, every delegation present, every observation vessel in range, repositioned for optimal sensor coverage. The Vorath had 2 cruisers sitting at the edge of the approach corridor. The Keth had 4 frigates in a loose formation that could charitably be described as ceremonial and less charitably as a blockade. The Dravani had sent their flagship, the vast and ancient vessel called the Ascendant Reach, which was by any measure 40 times the mass of the Perseverance, and which was assigned to escort the human ship to its docking berth. The Perseverance appeared on the main display as a clean return signal. No sensor scatter, no anomalous readings, no signs of distress, hull temperature nominal, all transponders broadcasting correctly, running lights at standard setting, not battle stations, not emergency mode, just the ordinary slow pulse of a vessel on approach. Its hull was slightly discolored along the forward sections, the oxidation from the neutron star pass not fully cleared. It looked like a ship that had been somewhere interesting. Coordinator Haas of the Dravani opened the escort hail on the primary Diplomatic channel. I watched the communication log update. In real time. The Perseverance acknowledged. Immediately, correct protocol correct. Codes correct registration sequence, it. Accepted the escort assignment and confirmed its approach vector, all. Standard all correct. And then, without being prompted, without it being required by any protocol I had ever read, it opened a secondary channel and hailed every vessel in the observation fleet simultaneously. 41 ships of 17 species in a ring around the approach corridor all received the same message at the same moment. I watched the translation alerts light up across my board. The message was in the primary conclave trade dialect, the one language that every registered species understood at a functional level. It said, "Greetings from the Perseverance and her crew. We hope your observation posts have been comfortable. We have brought charts." Then it transmitted to every ship in that ring the complete navigational survey of the Scar microlane. Not just the basic chart it had sent to the Keth border station months ago, the full survey, entry vectors, hazard mapping, gravitational anomaly markers, recommended approach speeds for 6 different vessel classes, seasonal variance data based on observations taken during the transit itself. It was, by any objective measure, the most comprehensive navigational document anyone had received about that region in recorded history, for free, to everyone. At the same moment, the Keth ambassador's channel lit up with what the translation algorithm processed as involuntary verbal surprise. The Voreth cruiser on the left side of the formation went silent on all outbound communications for 47 seconds. I counted, which in Voreth signals protocol meant the command crew was in urgent private consultation. The Dravani flagship, the Ascendant Reach, maintained its escort course and said nothing, but its sensor array rotated in a configuration that meant it was performing deep scans of the Perseverance at maximum resolution. Nina grabbed my arm from the next console. I did not look at her because I could not stop watching the board. The Perseverance entered the approach corridor. The Ascendant Reach fell in. Beside it, the size difference was almost hard to look at directly. The human ship was a compact, practical-looking vessel with clean, functional lines and a hull that showed its years, and beside it the Dravani flagship was a cathedral in space, all sweeping geometry and layered shielding plates built to make species feel the weight of power. The Perseverance matched the flagship's pace without adjustment, no acceleration, no hesitation. Then the Dravani flagship's captain did something that was not in any protocol. He opened a direct channel to the Perseverance, ship to ship, unrecorded by the official conclave logs, but absolutely captured by every monitoring station and range. He said, "Your vessel is rated for deep survey. It is not a combat ship." Commander Kate Reyes responded in 9 seconds. I found out later that she had been on the bridge during the entire approach, which was required, but that she had been drinking tea, which was not. She said, "That is correct." The Dravani captain said, "You flew through the Heron 7 emission zone." She said, "We did." He said, "Our best probe lasted 40 minutes." She said, "We ran some modifications. It worked out." There was a pause, the kind of pause that a translation algorithm cannot process because it does not contain words. Then the Dravani captain said, "What is your weapon capacity, honestly?" I held my breath. Commander Ray said, "Honestly, I will send you the full manifest right now. Nothing hidden." She did. The complete weapons load of the Perseverance appeared on the official conclave monitoring channel. I pulled it up. It was, as I had noted in my file, modest, not embarrassing, but modest. 2 defensive energy arrays, 4-point defense clusters, 1 medium-range torpedo bank with a standard load, the kind of armament a survey vessel carries because deep space has hazards that are not political in nature. The Dravani captain read the manifest. I could not see his face, but I could hear the specific quality of his silence. Then Ray's added, without being asked, "That is the loadout we chose for this mission. We have room for more." The Dravani captain said nothing for 11 seconds. Then he said, "Understood," and closed the channel. The Perseverance docked at berth 7. Without incident, standard docking clamps, standard umbilical connections, standard power handshake with the station grid. The whole procedure took 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Then the boarding ramp extended, and 43 humans walked off the ship. I was watching on the docking bay camera feed, which was live on every screen in the monitoring wing. They came down the ramp in small groups, talking to each other, carrying personal bags. One of them, I later confirmed it, was Lieutenant Paul Decker, the one who had run the bread-making workshop, was holding a container that turned out to contain a gift of preserved foodstuffs for the docking bay staff. 2 crew members were in animated discussion about something and had to be nudged back into formation by a colleague who was grinning. Commander Hayes came down last. She was a medium-height woman with short dark hair and the particular posture of someone who was comfortable in low-gravity environments. She stopped at the bottom of the ramp, looked around the docking bay at the conclave, officials waiting at the observation cameras at the sheer size of the station around her, and her expression was calm. Not performed calm, not suppressed nervousness trying to look calm. Just calm. Like she had expected to be here. Like she had always known she would make it. The head of the docking reception committee, a senior conclave official, named Administrator Vel, stepped forward to deliver the formal arrival acknowledgement. It was a standard speech, 15 lines, used for all tribute vessels. It referenced, among other things, the purpose of the tribute system and the gravity of the occasion. Hayes listened to all of it, then she shook Vel's hand. The gesture had apparently been briefed correctly, because Vel did not flinch and said, "Thank you, my crew is ready to begin whenever the conclave is." Vel said, "There will be a preparation period before the formal hearing." Hayes said, "Of course. Is there somewhere we can get coffee? We finished our good beans about a week out." Vel did not know what coffee was. His assistant looked it up on a data tablet and said something quietly in his ear. Vel said, "We will arrange something." Hayes said, "Wonderful, thank you," and turned to her crew and gave a small nod. That clearly meant we are good at ease. 43 people, visibly relaxed at once. I had my chin in my hands at that point. Watching the feed, Director Cole was standing next to me, and he said very quietly, "Grant, you were right. Something has changed." I said, "I think something has been changing for 6 months, sir. We just weren't watching the right things." The conclave hearing was scheduled for 3 Days out. I spent those 3 days finalizing my brief, cross-referencing the last of the transit data and trying very hard to prepare for something that I was increasingly convinced no one in the conclave had ever actually prepared for. Before, we had been waiting for a show of strength. What had shown up was something else entirely. The hearing chamber was, on the day of the formal session, at its fullest capacity I had ever seen. 17 species seated, 8 more present as observers without formal standing, every translation array running at maximum capacity. The ambient noise of that many different biological systems breathing, clicking, humming, and rustling was a low constant pressure in the room. I had a seat in the monitoring gallery. Not on the floor, but Director Cole had arranged access to the full translation feed, so I caught everything. Commander Kate Reyes entered with 2 members of her crew, her chief science officer, a quiet, precise man named Dr. Alec Ford, and her chief engineer, a tall, deliberate woman named Lieutenant Commander Helen Marsh. The 3 of them sat at the human delegation table, which was a small and undistinguished piece of furniture positioned at the far end of the floor. From the senior delegations and arranged their materials, I noticed that Reyes had a printed document in front of her, not a data tablet, actual paper. I could not imagine how she had actual paper on a deep survey vessel. Later, when I asked, the answer turned out to be that Helen Marsh had improvised a pulping process from organic waste materials during the transit, which was exactly the kind of answer I should have expected from this ship. Administrator Vell called the session to order and delivered the formal framing. Humanity had been issued the conclave entry ultimatum, had responded with a single vessel of non-military designation, and the purpose of today's session was to determine the appropriate classification. Instead, as outcome, it was phrased with the careful neutrality of bureaucratic language, but the meaning was plain. This was a judgment hearing. Humanity was expected to explain itself and then accept a decision. Ray stood. She was not visibly nervous. She was not visibly performing confidence either. She simply stood, looked at the chamber, and began speaking in the conclave trade dialect that she had clearly spent the transit learning to an extremely high level of fluency. She said, "I appreciate the chambers time. I will keep this simple. Earth did not misunderstand the ultimatum. We understood it precisely. We chose not to meet it on its own terms because we do not believe those terms are the right ones." The ambient noise of the chamber did something interesting. It did not get louder, it got quieter. Ray continued, "The tribute system assumes that safety is created by demonstrated destruction capacity. We do not disagree that security matters. We disagree with the measurement. We sent one ship not because it was all we could spare, but because one ship was what this moment required. We are not here to impress you with numbers. We are here to propose something better." Ambassador Velk of the Cath leaned forward. "And what," he said, "does Earth believe is better?" "A working relationship," Ray said, "not a tributary one." She gestured to Dr. Ford, who activated a shared display for the chamber. On it appeared the neutron star data, the 6 hours of direct emission zone survey that the Perseverance had gathered, raw data, annotated, organized, and freely offered. We collected this during transit, Ray said. It represents the most detailed survey of a Class X emission zone, available in any database we have access to. We know that 3 conclave member species have active research programs requiring this data. It took us 6 hours to gather it. We did it because we were passing by and it seemed like a waste not to. She paused. That is how we think about things. It is not efficient to pass by something useful without stopping. It is not efficient to hold information that other people need. It is not efficient to arrive at a destination without having done good work along the way. The Vorath delegation's lead speaker, Admiral-designate Preth, rose. Commander, he said, your shielding survived a Class X emission zone. Our best probe lasted 40 minutes in comparable conditions. Will you share the technical specifications? Ray said yes. Preth paused immediately. Now if you'd like, Ray said. Helen Marsh placed a data chip on the table. A conclave attendant collected it and inserted it into the chamber's central data terminal. The display updated full technical specifications, annotated engineering notes, fabrication tolerances, material recommendations, all of it. I watched 3 Vorcha engineers in the gallery lean forward in their seats simultaneously. The Dravani coordinator has stood. She had been silent through the opening, her sensory cilia fully extended in the posture I had learned to associate with deep attention. She said, Commander, raise the SCAR microlane chart you distributed on approach. Our own survey teams have attempted that mapping 3 times in 40 years, twice with significant crew loss. The lane was considered unmappable at our technology level. How did you do it? Ray said, the lane is not unmappable. It requires an approach at a specific angle relative to the gravitation shear, then a series of short translations rather than one continuous faster than light run. The geometry is uncomfortable but survivable. We found the entry angle by cross-referencing old Dravani relay station data with current particle drift readings. Has said the old relay station data, the decommissioned station at coordinates epsilon 73. Ray said that was the one. We stopped there for 11 hours to pull the archive properly. The chamber was very quiet. I thought about what coordinator has was sitting with in that moment. Her species had built that relay station, had operated it for 60 years, had stripped it and considered it dead for 2 centuries, and a human survey ship had parked beside its skeleton and extracted something useful from it that the Dravani themselves had not thought to look for. Has sat down slowly. Velk of the Cath spoke again. I must ask the question that has been discussed in many closed sessions since your departure from your home system. He said, you sent 1 ship not because of limitation, you say. Then I ask this directly, what is Earth's actual military capacity, not the Perseverance's loadout, Earth's? Reyes looked at him for a moment. Then she said, Earth's military capacity is sufficient. I will not give you a number because a number would not be honest. Capacity is not a fixed quantity. It is a function of need and application. What I can tell you is that Earth does not go anywhere unprepared, and we do not make offers we are not able to back up. If you are asking whether we can defend ourselves, the answer is yes. If you are asking whether we want to, the Answer is that we genuinely prefer not to need to. Velk said, that is not a number. Ray said it is the truthful answer. I could give you a number that would impress you. It would also be incomplete. The honest answer is that we are capable of meeting what is asked of us, and that the ship you are looking at is the ship this particular problem required. She paused. If the problem had required 10 ships, we would have sent 10. Velk leaned back slowly. The Keth beside him were doing the quiet click murmur that I had learned to read as internal discussion reaching a point of significant weight. Admiral Designate Preth of the Voreth said, you speak of what a problem requires. This problem, the ultimatum, required a fleet. You sent a survey vessel. The ultimatum required us to demonstrate that we belong here. Ray said, we chose to do that with the 6 months we had available to us. Whether we succeeded is your judgment, not ours. Preth was quiet for a moment, then he said, what did you bring us that we did not ask for? Ray smiled. It was a small, direct smile. The microlane charts, the neutron star data, the old relay archive. For the Arish boundary maps, the shielding specifications, 43 different first contact cultural briefing packets, 1 per crew member, which Dr. Ford will distribute to the relevant delegations. After this session, and approximately 4 kg of preserved goods that Petty Officer Grace Liu insisted on bringing because she said showing up anywhere empty-handed is bad manners. The chamber made several different sounds that did not entirely resolve into any single emotion. I was taking notes so fast that my hand cramped. I stopped and sat back for a moment and tried to see the whole room at once. Ambassador Velk of the Cath, who had spoken for 11 uninterrupted minutes about species that had tried to be clever with the entry ultimatum and what had become of them, was sitting with his head slightly bowed and his upper limbs folded in the posture his species used for deep internal reconsideration. Coordinator Haas of the Drevani was looking at Rays with her sensory cilia fully extended and utterly still. The posture I had learned from the cultural briefing files of someone who was listening at maximum capacity because they were afraid of missing something. The VOR-F engineers in the gallery had the data chip specifications on their personal tablets and were no longer watching the floor at all. The Arish observer, present without formal standing, a small quiet being named Delegate Marrow, who had attended every conclave session for 11 years without ever being given the floor, was sitting perfectly still with what I can only describe as the expression of someone who has just seen their name, a document they had stopped expecting to find. It was the Arish boundary maps. The Perseverance had found them in the relay station archive and given them to the Arish without condition as a courtesy note from a ship that was passing by. 60 years of a small species trying to get their own history recognized, and a crew of 43 on a 6-month transit had handed it back to them without making it a transaction. The formal session broke for deliberation at the midpoint of the day. I found myself in a corridor outside the monitoring wing during the recess, stretching my legs, and turned a corner to find Commander Ray standing alone by a viewport holding a cup of something hot. I stopped. She looked at me. I was a junior analyst. She was whatever she was. I was not sure the conclave had a category for it yet. I said, I read your transit log, the whole thing, all 63 pages of what I built from it. She looked at me with patient attention and said, what did you make of it? I said, honestly, I have been trying to work out whether you all knew exactly what you were doing or whether it came naturally. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, those are not different things. I said, were you afraid? She looked at the viewport. Yes, she said. There were moments, especially at Heron 7, especially the first 2 hours. Inside the zone when the readings were doing things none of us had a framework for. I said, how do you keep moving when you are afraid? She said, fear is information. It tells you what has stakes. You take that information, you add it to everything else you know, and you make the best decision you can with the full picture. Then you keep going because the alternative is to stop, and stopping is not usually the right answer. She looked at me again. You filed that brief for your director, she said, 63 pages. I blinked. How did you know about that? She said, because a thorough person was watching closely, and that means a thorough person was building a file. I would have done the same thing. She paused. Was any of it wrong? I said no. She said, good. She looked back at the viewport. Then you already understand what we were doing. The deliberation resumed. It lasted 11 more days, and the Perseverance crew was only required to be present for the first 2 of them. For the remaining 9 days, they stayed in their berth ship, and the monitoring wing's passive acoustic sensors picked up at various hours music from at least 4 different instruments, what appeared to be a group cooking session in the ship's galley, and one extended period of what the algorithm could only classify as laughter, the real kind, among people who are comfortable with each other and have been through something together and have come out the other side. On the morning of the 12th day, the conclave chamber reconvened. Administrator Vell called the session to order. The deliberation result was announced. Not with a vote count, not with a formal motion and seconded response. It was announced in the conclave's oldest tradition, the one reserved for decisions that did not require argument. A complete and absolute silence from every delegation in the room. In conclave tradition, that silence meant the matter was not in dispute. Humanity was granted a seat, not as a tributary species, not as a protected species under the patronage of a larger power, a full seat, pure status, equal standing. Reyes received the news in the chamber the same way she had received everything else on this trip, with calm, with a small precise nod, and with the air of someone who had done her math and was not entirely surprised by the answer. But when she turned to Alec Ford and Helen Marsh, who were seated beside her, what passed between the 3 of them was not calm at all. It was quick and quiet and entirely human, and it was a long moment before they composed themselves again. I wrote in my log that night, we came here expecting to be judged. We were. But somewhere in the 11 days of deliberation, the judgment stopped being about whether we belonged and started being about what having us here was going to mean. I think that is a different kind of reckoning entirely, and I think the conclave is only just beginning to understand it. The official communique went out to all member species on the morning after the decision. I drafted the summary for the human liaison archive, which was the kind of work I did well and did quietly, and when it was done, I sat at my console and looked at what I had written and thought about what it meant. It meant that humanity had a seat. It did not say anything about what the galaxy was now quietly doing in response. Nobody talked about that in official channels. The communique was formal and clean and made no reference to the fact that in the 3 weeks since the Perseverance had docked, 14 separate technical requests had come through the Conclave Information Sharing Protocol from 6 different species, all requesting access to data that had originated with the Perseverance's transit survey work. The neutron star data was most popular. The microlane charts had been downloaded by every registered freight consortium in the Conclave database. The shielding specifications had disappeared into the Vorath research network, and not a single word had come back out, which was itself a kind of answer. I kept the tracking log. It was not my assigned work anymore. Director Cole had moved me to full analyst position on the human liaison desk, which came with more hours and more access and less time for the quiet, obsessive file building that had consumed the past 6 months. But I kept the tracking log in my personal files because I found that I could not stop, because the story was not over. It was barely beginning. The first thing I noticed 40 days after the decision was a change in the Dravani Exploration Division's roster. It was in the public administrative record, a restructuring notice, dry in formal, transferring a significant portion of the long-range survey budget from standard sector mapping to what the notice called efficiency optimized transit methodology. I sat with that phrase for a while. Then I pulled the Dravani's previous long-range survey protocols, compared them to what I knew of how the Perseverance operated, and found 7 direct parallels in the new methodology documents. They were doing it our way. Not officially, not in any statement or acknowledgement, just quietly in the administrative record, reorganizing the way they approached deep rain exploration to incorporate principles they had observed in a human survey ship's 6-month transit. I wrote a note in my personal file. The Dravani learned something. They will not say so publicly. Watch the next 3 years of their exploration data. The Keth Cultural Exchange Office, which had existed for 40 years as a largely ceremonial body that processed maybe 3 exchange requests per year, suddenly had 12 applications in process. I could not directly confirm the cause, but the timing was aligned with something the Perseverance's crew had done during their docking period, specifically the cultural briefing packets that Dr. Alec Ford had distributed after the hearing. 1 packet per crew member, 43 species-specific documents covering history, social context, communication, norms, and what the cover memo described as things we found genuinely interesting. About you. I had read the Keth one. It was 22 pages long and referenced source material that the Keth Academy of History had not published in common translation, which meant someone on the Perseverance's crew had read Keth academic papers in the original language during the transit and taken notes. The Keth exchange applications were not from institutions, they were from individuals, young researchers, and students who had received the briefing packet and wanted to know more about the species that had bothered to read their history. I noted it in the log and moved on. The Voreth were harder to read. They were always harder to read. Their public communications gave nothing away, and their official position on humanity's conclave seat was a precisely worded statement of acknowledgement that contained no evaluative language whatsoever, which in Voreth diplomatic practice meant they had not made up their minds. What I had were secondary signals. The fact that 3 Voreth engineers had been observed at the conclave technical library pulling materials on deep space metallurgy at a rate of approximately 1 visit per day for the past month. The fact that the Voreth Commercial Shipping Consortium had quietly updated its hazard protocols for the Scar region, using the Perseverance's microlane data without any public acknowledgement. The fact that the Voreth Deep Shipyard, which was not visible from any public sensor platform and whose projects were essentially never publicly acknowledged, had registered a new power draw signature consistent with a research and development project of significant scale. I did not know what they were building. I was fairly confident it was something that did not exist before they saw Helen Marsh's shielding specs. Nina came to sit with me one afternoon while I was working through the latest monthly tracking update. She watched me for a few minutes, then said, "You are going to be doing this for the rest of your career, are you not?" I said, "Probably." She said, "You should write it up properly, the whole transit analysis, everything from the 11-hour stop through the hearing. It is the most complete picture of how this went that anyone has, and you did it from a monitoring console as a junior analyst." I said, "I have been thinking about it." She said, "What are you waiting for?" I thought about that. "I am waiting until I understand the ending," I said. "And I am not sure I do yet." She said, "You mean the other ships?" I looked at her. She said, "The engineer Marsh, what she said at the docking bay dinner. I was not there, but Decker told me." I had been told, too. I had been sitting with it ever since. Helen Marsh at an informal dinner with several conclave observation staff on the 4th night of the deliberation period had been asked a casual question about whether the Perseverance was the best survey vessel Earth had. She had apparently finished her drink, set the cup down, and said, "This is the survey class. You should see what we sent to the other arm." Then she had moved on to a different topic, as if she had said nothing of particular significance. I pulled up the star map on my personal display. I looked at the galactic arm that contained the conclave. I looked at the other one. There were 17 species in the conclave. Most of them had been spacefaring for longer than humanity had been farming. The oldest, the Dravani, had a documented interstellar history going back 11,000 years. They had explored perhaps a quarter of this arm with any thoroughness. The other arm, the one they call the outer band, was considered too remote, too hazardous, and too resource-intensive to be worth systematic exploration. It was listed in conclave navigational records as mapped in broad outline only, with interior detail largely unknown. I had done the math the night Marsh made that comment. If the Perseverance, a survey vessel, could do what it had done in 6 months of transit while also attending to a civilization-level diplomatic crisis, what was a dedicated mission doing in the outer band with presumably its full attention on the work? How long had they been out there? How many lanes had they charted? How many abandoned stations had they pulled archives from? How many neutron stars had they flown through? I sat with that star map for a very long time. 53 days after the decision, I received a visitor to my office. It was Delegate Meru of the Arish, the small quiet being who had attended 11 years of conclave sessions without once being given the floor. Meru had been given the floor 7 times in the past month. The boundary map data from the Perseverance had not just been acknowledged by the conclave, it had been formally entered into the geographic record, which meant the Arish territorial dispute with the Keth had a factual foundation it had lacked before. The deliberation on that dispute was ongoing, but Meru's expression when we had met in the corridor after the boundary record was entered was something I did not have words for then, and still do not have entirely adequate words for now. Meru sat in my office and said, "I want to ask you something." I said, "Please." Meru said, "The humans your people do. They always do this." I said, "Do what?" Meru said, "Find things that are lost. Give them back." I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the 11-hour stop at the relay station skeleton. I thought about the 43 cultural briefing packets. I thought about Grace Liu's preserved food container and Paul Decker's bread-making workshop and Kate Ray's drinking tea on the bridge during final approach, like the whole situation was simply a thing to be dealt with and then moved through. I said, "I think we try to." Meru said, "The historical record of the Arish boundary, we had documentation going back to our first territorial surveys. We lost access to it when the Dravani archived it, and then the archive went dark. We filed requests for 60 years of hearings and requests and formal motions, and we were told the data was unrecoverable." Meru paused. "Human ship stopped for 11 hours at a dead station while passing through on its way somewhere else and found it." I said, "I know." Meru said, "They did not keep it. They did not use it as leverage. They gave it to us in a courtesy message, like they were returning something that belonged to us." I said, "It did belong to you." Meru was quiet for a moment. Then Meru said, "Yes, it did." We sat in the office for a while after that. Meru eventually left. I sat at my desk and opened my personal log, the one I had been keeping since the day the conclave left, and I looked at the first entry. I had written, "They sent one ship." Chamber laughed. I do not know what to make of this. I scrolled to a blank page. I thought about everything I knew now that I had not known then, about the transit stops and the relay station and the neutron star and the bread-making workshop and the recipe for green chili stew, about Kate Ray's telling me that fear is information and you keep going because stopping is not usually the right answer, about Helen Marsh's shielding specs sitting in the Vorath Research Network, about an entire galactic arm that no one had mapped properly, where something from Earth had been working quietly for an unknown period of time. I thought about the galaxy laughing. I thought about what the galaxy understood now that it had not understood then. The conclave had expected a show of strength. Humanity had sent a survey vessel with 43 people, fresh ingredients for 3 months, and a willingness to stop for 11 hours at something most species would have flown past without a second thought. That was the part the galaxy had been trying to calculate ever since, not the weapons load, not the military capacity estimate, not the political maneuvering. The 11 hours at the dead relay station. The 6 hours inside a neutron star out of what was apparently a combination of scientific interest and professional thoroughness, the 43 briefing packets, the recipe. The galaxy had laughed because it thought it was looking at poverty or arrogance, something that could not afford a proper fleet or something too proud to admit it. It had taken the conclave 11 days of closed deliberation to arrive at the actual answer, which I had written in my log 3 weeks before the decision came down. What the galaxy had been looking at was abundance, not the abundance of ships or weapons, the abundance of attention, of time, given freely to things that mattered, of the conviction that if you were passing by something worth examining, you examined it, and if you found something that belonged to someone else, you gave it back, and if someone needed information you had, you sent it to them, and if you were arriving somewhere important, you arrived rested and fed and ready, because preparation was not a luxury, it was a baseline. The galaxy had measured humanity by the number of ships it could put in a fleet. Humanity had measured the problem by what the problem actually needed. Those were not the same calculation, and the galaxy was only beginning to understand that they would never be the same calculation, because they came from entirely different ways of thinking about what power was for. I started writing. I wrote the analysis I had promised Nina. I would write the complete record from the 11-hour stop through the hearing and the decision and the 53 days after. I wrote about Meru and the boundary maps. I wrote about the Voreth shipyard and the Dravani methodology, restructuring and the Keth exchange applications. I wrote about the things I knew and the things I was inferring and the things that were still open questions sitting in my log waiting. I wrote about the outer arm. I wrote about Helen Marsh saying you should see what we sent to the other arm, and about sitting with a star map afterward and doing math and not being able to sleep. I wrote the conclave laughed when humans sent one ship, the ship arrived, and the conclave stopped laughing. And now 43 days after the decision, 14. Technical request submissions, 7. Dravani methodology changes, 12 Keth. Exchange applications, 1 Voreth deep. Shipyard project of unknown scale, and 1 very small species finally holding their own history in their hands. Now, the galaxy is doing something more complicated than laughing. It is thinking. It is recalculating. It is sitting with a star map in the middle of the night and doing math that does not resolve into a comfortable answer. I know because I am doing the same math. I saved the document. I looked at the clock. It was very late. The monitoring wing was quiet, half the lights on there. Low cycle setting, the displays showing the slow drift of shipping traffic and the distant clean signals of vessels and transit across the arm. Somewhere in the outer band, something from Earth was working. I did not know how many ships. I did not know for how long. I did not know what they had found. What I knew was that they had gone there. Because going there was worth doing. Because there were things to learn and lanes to chart and old stations to stop at and archives to pull and things to return to the species they belonged to. And they had done it the same way. The Perseverance had crossed this arm. Unhurried, thorough, well-fed. Ready for whatever was on the other Sighed. I closed the document, turned off my desk light, and sat in the dark for a moment with the star map glowing on the secondary display. The galaxy had laughed. Then the ship arrived. And nothing from that point forward was going to be quite the same. I got up. I straightened my chair. I turned off the display. I went home through quiet corridors and I tried to sleep, and I thought about the outer arm. And I smiled. And